Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming here. Thank you to our panelists and our moderator. This is our panelist, Artist Moms Making Art and Raising Children. My name is Lauren. I'm the Adult Programs Coordinator. So one of the reasons that we're pulling this program, Artist Moms, is because we have an exhibit, Picturing Home, that's going to be closing August 13th. So if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's in the exhibit hall. But in Picturing Home, we have artist mom, Dorothea Lange, who was a documentary photographer and arguably has photographed the most famous picture in American history, the migrant mother. And we wanted to go ahead and highlight the challenges and the wonderful art that comes from being a mother and being an artist. And so she lived from 1895 to 1965, worked with the Farm Security Administration, and has documented some important work. So these wonderful ladies here are doing the same thing today, and we're going to go ahead and we're going to highlight moms. This doesn't mean that we're not going to acknowledge all the other caretakers, fathers, grandparents, anybody else who takes care of children. That is all wonderful work as well, but we're just highlighting our moms today. So our moderator here is Laura Spalding Best. Laura, thank you for coming.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm super happy to be here today with this amazing, talented panel and lots of kids in the room. This is exactly the kind of art event I'd like to see a lot more of. I'm an artist. I've been living in the Valley since 1999. I've been an artist for about 20 years. My work really looks at the Sonoran desert landscape, resources in the desert. I do oil painting on found objects. I do mural work and public art as well. I've also worked in the arts and culture sector for about 17 years. I was formerly at Scottsdale Museum of Contemporary Art as the exhibitions manager for about 16 years. And I'm currently Senior Director of Exhibits at Desert Botanical Garden. And I've been at that for a little over a year now. I have two amazing kids. I'm the one that doesn't have my fam with me today. So my son is homesick, and my daughter's at a sleepover. So it was the first week of school this week. But I have a 9-year-old son, Malcolm, and I'm a new mom to a teenager. My daughter just turned 13. So our daughter, Rosie, is 13. So we just started 4th and 8th grade. Wild. That's a little bit. I think that's enough about me.
Thank you. I'm going to go ahead and we'll go on to our next panelist. We've got Ashley Czajkowski. So Ashley, I'm going to hand you this microphone here if you don't mind. And who do we have with you today?
Hello, this is Ayla. She's my one and only daughter. She just turned 19 months. So I'm a new artist mom, still in this transition. And I was born in a small town in the Midwest, but I've lived here in the Phoenix metro area for about 10 years, which seems crazy. A lot of my work centers around the idea of the human animal and kind of our interconnectedness with the rest of our environment and rewilding the human. And then in the medium, I work primarily with photography, but really an expanded kind of expectation of that. So I do a lot of video and installation work, work with historic photographic methods, so a lot more tangible kind of work as well. And yeah, I'm excited to be here. I think that's good.
We're happy to have you, and we're happy to have a bonus panelist too. All right, I'm going to move on to Gloria Martinez-Granados. So thank you so much for being here, and we're going to go ahead and get you on that. And if that mic's not going to work, I can bring this one over too.
So yeah, my name is Gloria Martinez-Granados. I'm an interdisciplinary artist. I'm also a mother. My daughter is here today, Rihanna. She turned 18, so not such a young kid anymore. But definitely someone who continues to encourage me to be not just a better artist, but a better person. And she's my finest art critique that I can have around. I work in interdisciplinary styles. I don't really have one main practice, but I often do go back to my fiber artwork. I really love working with natural materials, but I also like working with unnatural materials that are just found objects. I think that the process of working with different materials also allows me to be more expressive within my work and kind of finding a way of understanding what it is that I'm trying to say. Most of my work is about my experience growing up undocumented. I was born in Guanajuato, Mexico, and my family migrated to the United States. So I'm raised in South Phoenix, Arizona, which is also something that is profoundly expressed through my work.
Thank you so much. And then to our final panelist, we have Sami Lange. And Sami, I'm going to hand this over to you.
Hi everyone, my name is Sami Lange. I am originally trained as a printmaker. Now I primarily work with paper and dye and make huge stitched paper quilts. I'm also an academic librarian, so 9 months out of the year I build textbooks and create zero-cost degree pathways for college students. And I just completed my doctoral research in an educational doctorate where I studied the impact for female faculty, full-time faculty in community colleges, looking through the lens of the work-family border theory and how as women, when we work in any industry, whether that's art or education, and we also mother, how we have to manage crossing borders between the work and the family domain constantly. And when I did my qualitative research studying all of the women at 3 community colleges, I was trying to see if there were any patterns that we do as working mothers that we can change or impact by awareness about how we look at our time. So themes of time, themes of border crossing in different domains, and sort of the general experience of what it's like being a working mother are themes that show up in my work constantly. And I'm happy we sat like this because mine are 8 and 9, so I feel like we have this really nice transition. And I've learned a lot from that stage, and I can't wait to hear everything that you have to say, Gloria. So mine are right back there in the basketball uniforms because, you know, as a mother, you're constantly headed everywhere. So we're going to a basketball game right after this. And I will also say one more theme. We got here the day COVID hit. So I've been here for 3 years. We got here March 17th, 2020. We then went into quarantine for a full year where we potted with my grandparents. And so the landscape has a deep, deep influence on my work because I wasn't a native to Arizona. And I basically survived the entire quarantine year by going on walks. And so all of those colors are now just completely infused in my paper quilts.
So I'm going to lead us through 3 kind of separate topics for our panel today. And I mean, I think they go from maybe a little of the harder stuff to a little bit of the more positive messaging and hopeful stuff. But you can't avoid the stigma and adversity that's inherent to the relationship between being an artist and being a mother. So the first question I'm going to pose to our panelists is, what do you see as the main challenges to balancing both art and kids?
I'm happy to start. I feel like I'm a good person to start with because I think that I'm still working in the transition of this and finding a balance. I have to be totally honest. This first set of questions, I had a moment of like deep imposter syndrome where I was like, I don't know how to do this yet. You know, like I don't know if I have figured this out. So I think for me, one of the things that is really difficult is finding the energy. I remember, interestingly, I was making work even in grad school like 10 years ago, long before I was a mother, when I thought I never would be. I was making work about ideas of the maternal and maternal energy and what that is like. And I remember watching a video that by Tracy Emin, who is a well-known artist, really vulnerable work. She made the installation piece called My Bed, but she was talking about how she basically the whole video was about how she believes that she couldn't be a mother and an artist at the same time. And I watched this video and I had a conversation with my then thesis director about how I felt similarly. I felt like creative energy, whether it's put towards art making or child rearing, all comes from the same space. And that I was like, I don't know if I could do both. And I'm figuring out that I can, but it's different. Like, the making is different, and the way that they weave together is really beautiful, but I can't do both at the same time, or at least I haven't figured out how to do that. So I think that it goes really deep, like the stigmas, and it's also written into our society and art history. Like, I was reminded in a book I was reading recently about the piece by the Guerrilla Girls called something about being a woman artist, the advantages of being a woman artist, and one of them is the opportunity to choose between your career and motherhood. And so it's interesting that it's like woven in, and it's an expectation that it's one or the other. So yeah, I'm still figuring that out, but I think that energy, like finding that energy to do both, is really challenging.
I think one thing I've really sort of transitioned over the last almost 10 years of motherhood is that I used to feel like balance was this thing that you would be able to look at tangibly, like within a day or within a week. And last year I had a really significant life event. I was hit by a truck last July. I'm going on my 13-month anniversary. It was like total loss of control. My wonderful husband, who's sitting there, had to clothe me and dress me, and my mom made me like literally hundreds of burritos. I mean, like, all I would do is eat burritos. But it was like I couldn't do a studio practice for 3 months. I couldn't get out of bed. I was just icing 15 hours a day. And so I lost my whole studio practice. And what was interesting about that time was, had it happened 10 years ago, I would have lost faith that I would get back into the studio and find the balance. But even last July, when it had just happened, I was like, okay, this is a really unfair, unfortunate season, but it isn't about a daily balance or a weekly balance. And so that's one thing that I can see now is like, I look at it almost over a year instead of like a week or a month. And because I work in another field, I also know that there are crunch times with my semester. Because I'm teaching, I know that there's like certain times where I'm just not going to get that studio time. And then I know that there are certain times where for months on end, my kids are going to be tired because they're at school, and I'm going to get 3 hours before they wake up, you know? And so it's like just this acceptance that there's some really nice, sweet times coming, but they just might not be today. And so just that kind of constant reminder looking back, you know, and all of us have been practicing long enough, like we can look back over the decades and now see this cycle that keeps occurring. And so that's the one thing that kind of, I never even think about balance. I'm just like, when's the good season coming?
I think for me and my experience with motherhood and art, it kind of just came to me. I became a mother at a young age. I was 21 years old. I was still in college. I was back then in nursing school. So after I graduated nursing school, I wasn't able to become a nurse because of my immigration status. So that career just kind of went down the drain. It was one of the biggest disappointments that I've gone through. And having that happen at the same time when I was becoming a mother, it was just the scariest thing, right? Because here I am trying to get ready to provide financially for my family, and then not being able to do so. So the interesting thing that happened at that time is that art became a fountain for me, not only to practice it and have that practice that also helps so much mentally, right? But also having a means that was outside of the system to being able to monetize and provide for my family. And for me, I think it's been that financial aspect, the stigma that follows art as well, that I still struggle with it. You know, we're asked as artists to provide work, and oftentimes we're not paid until that work comes to fruition months or sometimes even years later. So yeah, I agree with y'all when we're talking about trying to find a balance that it doesn't exist. The only constant is always going to be change that continues to happen. So I think for me in art, I came at it a little bit backwards, where I started out in the art scene and vending at different local events through the valley. So then when I was able to go back to school, it was kind of a joke within my daughter and I, where I was like, okay, now that I'm in art school, does that make me an artist? Am I a real artist now? And we still kind of joke about it every time, like, you know, I come to a new career goal and I'm like, okay, so I'm a real artist now, right?
I love that. I think it's really good to acknowledge too, just like as a career, there's like kind of there's a lot of confidence and power just in identifying as an artist. A lot of people are hesitant to do that when there's so many artists out there in the world. But then as a career, which I think oftentimes can be more outwardly categorized as like a hobby, or that there's a lot of stigma there, but that it's one of the least supported monetarily, really hit and miss. There's a lot of things stacked against different people in the art world if you don't fit sort of the narrow stereotypical idea of what an artist is, which pretty much for every art mother, I think, sits outside of that. We're seeing like this slow change, but a lot of that change comes from support from each other. That's one of the things that I find. We'll talk about this a little bit in a little bit, but the most support or good advice I get is from other artist moms. We're sharing all the secrets today. Let me pull up our next question. Do you draw a line between home and studio? I'd love to know everybody's studio setup, if you have one, and what that back and forth looks like, what those priorities look like.
So everything is in flux. I had a home studio set up. That was also my home office so I have basically no delineation between home and studio and work. I'm also an educator. I teach online, so I teach from home. And I remember potently the day when I was still pregnant and I was moving playthings into my studio space. And I was like, this is going to be different. So for me, there's no separation, and that makes it really hard. What I've had to do, what I've been able to kind of figure out is that that I just like squeeze. I love what Sami said about kind of thinking about the creative practice more cyclically or in seasons. And so for me, like, my studio has actually really expanded because now I just like make work in the small moments wherever I can. And since it's photo-based work, I've been taking a lot of photographs even with my phone, and I have ideas for how that will manifest somehow, some way, but it's sort of expanded and collapsed all together, if that makes any sense. But it's murky and it's beautiful, and I'm figuring it out.
So based on some of my doctoral work, I started more consciously thinking about the boundaries that I wanted to implement and just looking at kind of what would make me happy and what would drive my practice in a way that felt really authentic. I think there's so much churn as an artist and so much to do when you make art, and there's like such a huge list of everything that you have to accomplish that sometimes you can get distracted, and it makes it hard to like enjoy the actual making of the work. And I always want to kind of start from that place. And so when I was doing my research on border crossing between the different domains, there were 3 different types of boundaries that came up: temporal or time, physical and psychological. And what I found was I started tracking all of my time. I'm really into time use surveys, like super into them. And so I started tracking all my time, and I started looking at it in two different ways. Psychologically, where is my head, versus physically, where is my body, and then comparing those two things and seeing what didn't work. And one thing that I found was I have a really nice studio space. My master bedroom in our home is actually my studio space. Me and my husband sleep in the little room. That was his idea, and I'm grateful for it. And so I have this like luxurious space, and I have 2 flat files, and I built a huge 4 by 5 foot standing work table with my kids. That was like one of our projects. And so it is a space that I can make anything that I want with my paper quilts in, any size that I want, and store anything. But what I found was when I walked into that space, if I do my grading in that space, or I do my other work, or I leave my laptop in there, then I walk into the space and it's the churn. And so I now separated physically. I do all my work a couple virtual days as an academic librarian. I do all that work at the kitchen table. And some of those small choices of just like where I'm physically going to practice have made a huge difference. So for my studio practice, I've taken over the laundry room and the master bedroom. And I'm happy with both of those scenarios.
So for me, there is no separation of art practice and studio space or life or family or friends. Like it all kind of just combines together. I think we're creatives. The other aspect of it too with my studio space, when we purchased our home, I didn't even realize that it didn't have a dining room. Like I just like was thinking, it's close to Central Phoenix, where I need to be close by. My daughter was going to school at the Arizona School for the Arts. So everything that we needed was in Central Phoenix, and the house was there. So the first thing we did was we bought this shed, like a storage shed, and I converted that into a silk screening print studio. My family came over, we cut things up, we insulated, did the drywall, put a AC unit, and the idea of it is that I can invite friends to come over. So that's also been something that we often do. My husband's also an artist, my father-in-law is an artist, so I feel like I've pretty much been in this arts community where everybody who I'm surrounded by is either part of my practice, supports my practice, or is just a loving person that's around. And to me, that community just becomes a very important aspect of it, whether it's expressed within the art or not. It still does have, it's what provides stability for my own practice. And specifically with printmaking, it's such a communal type of practice. And when I'm using the materials, there's no way that I'm going to use all the materials. So I wanted a space where people could come in. So that's kind of where I'm at in my home. And recently, I have also started renting out space with 2 other artists, one of them being my father-in-law, and another one being a longtime friend, my friend Emily Costello. We were in the Phoenix Fridas together. So I feel like my studio space is kind of expanding right now, and I don't really know what that means. But because I do have so many practices that I dabble into, it's kind of a chaotic mess that works for me right now.
That's very exciting. I'm gonna jump in on this one as well, because I think it's like a very number one asked question of when you're like, oh wow, you're an artist and you're a mom. How do you do it? It's just like kind of over and over again, and some of it is just like real boring. It's in the studio's in the living room. It's like really abrupt. If you come to my house and you open the front door, you're in it. It's half of the living room space. And when I was a younger artist, I had a studio off of Grand Avenue, like right when I was out of college, and I had it for a few years. It was cool. no kids at that time, so it was like all about art community and everything. But I realized really quick with the family that I would never be able to make my work without an in-home studio. And it's not, there's no lines. It's not separate. I hope to have that when they're a little bit bigger. But you learn that interruptions and disruptions really aren't interruptions and disruptions. Like you just pick up after that, I think. Let's see, I'll take us into our next topic here. How important support is when you're a mother, when you're an artist, I think in both ways. But the question is, who do you look up to as role models?
Yeah, so like I mentioned earlier, when I was a young mother, I also became part of a group collective called the Phoenix Fridas, and it was a group of women who identified as Latina, Indigenous, Chicana, and to have just a group of women, right, that really identified with me in a way that I had never experienced community, it was something that gave me a lot of fortitude, not just for me and my own personal expressions, but when we got together, we would have these craft nights, and we would just kind of talk about what was going on during our week and what our kids were up to, what schools each person had their kid in, what the kids' interests were, what types of materials we were wanting to experiment with, what kinds of practices can we learn skills from one another. So it's always been community that has been something that continues to help me just become a better person and to have someone to reach out to and ask for help. Role models, I think, come in different forms. Of course, my mother-in-law, there's someone that I often look to, and family. But I feel like people in the community are always like the best resources. I obviously look to people like Frida Kahlo. It's a reason why we joined the Phoenix Fridas, and we all glorified her before Frida Kahlo was, just a name that anyone would identify. Back in the days, as we would do these festivals on Frida Kahlo's birthday, and people would be like, "Who's Frida Kahlo?" So I think during that time, it was definitely something that I can look back on and see how much that influenced me as a person, a mother, and a creative now. And when it comes to just people that I look up to, they are often people that are within arm's reach. It's someone that I can have like right there at that moment when I need them the most.
I think this question is so interesting because when I think about role models, I kind of do think about it kind of almost in a fractured way. It's like my role models who are artists, a lot of them are women, like Heather Patterson or Laura Ball. Czajkowski is one of my favorite artists who I followed for a long time, and she's a local artist, and she was my first Phoenix art friend, and I owe just like a huge, immense sense of gratitude for her for coming into a state I wasn't familiar with, and then being immediately quarantined and seeing what it's like to not have community, because I came from a California art community where I knew a lot of other artists and I had a lot of women friends, and then all of a sudden it's this global pandemic and I know no one and I'm working in another industry. And so it just, like, having her friendship really got me through a lot of hard times. But then I also started branching out and looking at other things I wanted to read, or looking more at resilience, and there's a podcast I became obsessed with, and I didn't know what day or time it was during the pandemic at all, but I can tell you every Tuesday, every other week at 2 p.m. I knew that this podcast would drop, and it's called We Regret to Inform You, and it's all about resilience, and it's all these beautiful stories about people in different industries, some artists, some filmmakers, some athletes going through decades of resilience, and so that's also part of how I started looking at my time differently. And I've been having a really solid studio practice now for 20 years, and I look back 20 years ago and I think, wow, I had a lot to learn about how I work. And so I've started kind of compartmentalizing who I look at for different things, but I completely agree that the individual community and access of like the person that you can call or text immediately is the most important to me, even if they have nothing to do with art. And so like my parents and my kids, they're so inspirational and they're so supportive that that's the thing that drives my practice the most, even though it's not necessarily someone who went to art school.
Yeah, I think when I was thinking about this question, my initial answers were kind of straightforward. And I'll mention those people because they're important people, but I have two really important artist mothers in my life that have become really strong role models. One is Betsy Schneider, who I teach with and I meet with during the school year, during the academic year, meet with every week. And so I was able to talk with her every week. We got less work done and more talking done, but it was really important for me. And I was able to talk with her through my pregnancy and into my postpartum and now, and just her support and that sort of community, because we're meeting virtually, was maintained all through the pandemic, and it was amazing. Another artist mother that I've worked with in the past that I really look up to is Forrest Solis, and she is a painter, and she also created the Creative Push Project, which I worked on back in 2016. Thank you. See, we all need the support. And so again, before I was a mother, but we were recording women talking about their birth stories. Would you like to say something? But I think through this conversation, thinking really about community, I feel like that community aspect is the most important part. So those two women are part of my community, but I'm just now thinking about how other people in my community have also been really supportive. My husband is also an artist, and I have a wider group of friends who are artists. Like we've been, both my husband and I are artists. We also have been like just surrounded by artists since we've been living here. And it's been interesting to see those dynamics change with my artist friends who are not parents. But I had a moment where two of my artist friends came over who were not mothers, and we were just all kind of lamenting similarly about our, lack of studio time. And, I was really getting kind of intense about not being able to have the time. And I was like, I just haven't been able to make anything. And one of them looked at me and said, but you did make something, and she's right over there, and she's not done yet. And I was just like, it just struck me. And I was so grateful, especially as a non-parent, for that recognition and thinking about, that creative energy, that for art making and parenting is activated and it's working, even if I'm not like making a tangible product, So I was just really grateful for that, and thinking about community and moments like this just being really important, integral to being able to do both, right?
That's a side follow-up question that I have is, I guess that the idea of the positive side of being, of being the two, of the duality there, does making your artwork make you a better mother? That maybe fulfillment that you receive from that, or vice versa, the fulfillment that you can receive from motherhood, from sort of the satisfaction of raising your child, does that contribute to your artistic energy?
Yes to all of the above. I think it's just sort of a beautiful woven life. I think it's this, when I have good mothering days, I'm like on fire. I'm like, I'm going to go dye 500 things. I'm not even going to make a formula. Like, let's just do this. And, I just spent like 4 hours cutting those 500 shapes. So, I mean, it's like there's like a freedom. But then on the other side, on the days when mothering is hard or your kids are sick or, like everything didn't go well, like I have shorts I need to change into in the car and they're wet because I forgot to put them in the dryer. Like, and I'm going to go in wet shorts to a basketball game after this, like those little moments where you're like, oh, how annoying. But it feels like, okay, I'll go into the studio and that's my self-care. It's like, and then there's bad days in the studio where you're like, forget this, it goes in the trash. And then you go like take the kids to Dave and Buster's or, it's like, I think you kind of have to like move it back and forth to like, make each one kind of make the day a little bit better. That's been my experience.
Yeah, I love that answer. I think for me, I've never felt more inspired as an artist. Like I have very little time to actually like manifest a lot of these things, but I just feel like I want to make so many things and I have so many ideas. And what I'm just starting, like literally within the last few weeks, I've been able to like change my expectations and mentality around my studio time to incorporate more play. And that has felt really refreshing. And it's inspired directly by watching my daughter experience the world, right? And like just releasing like the idea of I do a lot of conceptual work, so I oftentimes have, ideas, and then I'm sort of like illustrating those ideas, and it changes, in the process. But it's been a long time since I've just like sat down with some materials and just like played and experimented. And so I think that being a mom has helped inspire my art practice in that way. And then also, to Sami's point, like, when I take those moments, even if it's 5 minutes, to create something, it fuels me to be able to come back and thank you, I got it. To be back and play with my daughter and have just this sort of renewed, revitalized energy. I'm going to pass this on.
Yeah, I mean, I keep coming back to this whole community thing, right? Because it really is a huge part of, I guess if there's a way to measure my success as a mother, it always reflects back to community. One example that I always give is my daughter, when she was 2 years old, she just could not sit still. I mean, she would not be a kid that sits down and eats. She would just, grab food and run around with it. And we were vending at an event where Carmen Guerrero and Sarko Guerrero were doing a pastorela theatrical production. And my daughter sat through the whole play. Like, she just sat through it. And not only did she sit through it, there was a second showing, and she went back to the second showing and sat through the whole second showing. So that, my light bulb went off, and I thought, all right, theater classes for this kid. Like, it makes sense. So I found this organization called Rising Youth Theater. Her first performance with them was when she was 8 years old, and now she's working for them. So it's such a full circle to reach at such a young age within community. And whenever, people compliment me on my daughter and tell me I did such a great job raising her, I don't take the full credit, because I know that it wasn't just me. It was definitely all the artist friends, like my friend here, Jose Benavides, who's in the audience today, and every other artist friend that has been around. I feel that with kids, just being in that type of environment, it really connects you to other individuals. Oftentimes our society pushes the whole stranger danger idea, but it kind of cuts you off at the same time. So I think making those connections to unknown people in safe spaces is something that we greatly need, because it like the proverb says, right? It takes a village to raise a child, and it really does. I couldn't have done it myself. Like I said, I was 21 years old when I had my daughter, and just having all of that support has made me a better mother. Not to undercut my energy that I put into raising my child, but it definitely wasn't just me. It was a whole lot of support system that I had around. And then my daughter also being integrated into an art school where she wasn't just learning academics, she was also, playing piano, singing in the choir, being part of the theater, I don't know what you would call it, ensemble classes. She's the first one to go into the performance arts in our family, so we're like learning new language too. But yeah, it wasn't just me. Community does have such a big impact in the way that individuals are formed. So to me, that was the force that not only allowed me to be a better mother, but also what I needed as a creative to be able to express the ideas that I have.
I think it's, hopefully everyone here has a similar experience, but I always appreciated my family, but I really appreciated them after I had kids. I have amazing in-laws that live here. My parents are in other states, but my mother-in-law is an angel, and not just like kind of helping with care and even just being in the same room while someone else is playing with your kid or helping feed them or whatever, but caring about like every stage of the way. First steps, someone else is jumping up and down and weeping like I am, like because they're that invested. Definitely never take that for granted as part of the community of raising kids. The other follow-up question I kind of have to that is, I lost it. Have you seen? We all have different stages and different. So Gloria kind of came to your art practice after you already had your daughter, right? And Ashley's an artist before, but now just has the new baby, and Sami studies this, which is incredible, and should really be the moderator of this panel. I'm interested to know, because I know my answer for this. Do you see yourself, or have you adapted your practice? Have you shifted your practice since, even since becoming a mother, or just in relation to raising the kids, whether that's because of time constraints, space constraints, or anything like that?
Yes, is the short answer. Everything has changed, I feel like. One of the things, so conceptually, I'll start there. I've really been thinking a lot about, before I had my daughter, I was thinking about maternal energy, and I was also thinking about the human animal. And when I was reflecting on these questions before this panel, I was remembering how I had a studio visit with a photo critic and theorist who didn't actually give me any good feedback, I thought, at the time. But after I talked about my work and I showed my work, he didn't really give any feedback, but he looked at me and said, I remember when my wife was giving birth to our child, she just looked at me and made a sound that was so animal. And that story, even though I didn't think it was helpful for me at all in the studio visit, I was like, great, thanks, bye. But that story has stuck with me, and, I never felt more like my primal animal self than when I was in labor. I did a home birth with her, and I remember being on my hands and knees and making these sounds that were just, totally unrecognizable. My mom, who came in town for that, and my husband my husband took audio recordings because he was like, you're going to want to hear this later. And my mom took, she is not a very good photographer or videographer, but she is a documentarian for sure. And I have this archive of hours of video. I haven't been able to watch any of them yet. But so I really felt like I connected with my work in a different way even like when I was pregnant, but really when I was giving birth, and then postpartum too. Like just, I feel so connected to my animal body, like breastfeeding, and just like, it's interesting to think about your body as such a source of nourishment for another human, like another living being. And it's made me think too about kind of expanding that notion and the idea of the holobiont, which is basically like considering your body as an environment for other living organisms. Sure, when you're pregnant, you have a baby, but there's also like, your microbiome, right? Like our human bodies are hosts to lots of other living things. And also just thinking about how the maternal body is such an interesting space, I think, to consider. You okay, baby? Oh, yes. Are you okay? Fishing? Yes. Okay. That fractured time, right? The maternal body is such an interesting space, and to consider that I think a lot about connecting like the maternal body with the environment, and thinking that like a woman's body is the first environment every human experiences. That just blows my mind to think about, like, and how, so conceptually, I'm just like, all these things that I was like teasing at in my work before are really starting to make connections and like pathways for new work. In a real practical sense, I mentioned, getting back to play and materials. I'm been really inspired. One of the projects I've just started working on, I don't even know if it's a project yet. I don't want to call it a project because then I'll get too in my head about it, But I got this kaleidoscope for her that you can put like nature objects in, and I've just been having the best time. Like, she doesn't care about it at all, but I've been having the best time like making new videos with weird things that I find in the environment, and it's really fun. And another project, so I've really been reinvestigating childhood too, and one of this other like super slow projects I've started, it requires building a Victorian dollhouse. Now I got this like a month after I had her, and I was like, cool, I'm gonna build this in like 3 months, and then I'm gonna plant seeds in it in the spring. I have maybe like the very base level of this thing built, and I've only been able to build it, thankfully, community, to an artist friend of mine who has come over, and I'm like, okay, if you want to come over and hang out, can we just like build this dollhouse? And that's all we've been doing, and it's been really great. But yeah, so practically my practice has shifted and slowed down, like just the timeline. Now I'm thinking about either not projects and just playing, or like really long-term projects that will just come to fruition when they do. I've forgotten the question. I got really tangential there, but.
I can think of a couple ways my practice has changed. One is that I've always been an artist who has just a million ideas. Like, I could make art every day, all day long, until I die, and I would still have thousands of ideas left of stuff to do. And so I think there's this acknowledgement of like, okay, A, I'm probably midlife, let's acknowledge that, and there's less time. And B, I need to choose now. And I think the accident was a turning point too, because I had just finished reading the book 4,000 Weeks, and it talks about how roughly on average we have about 4,000 weeks to live, which sounds shockingly short. And so then I was like, okay, well, I have 2,000-ish. And so then it's like, I need to prioritize what we're going to make in that 2,000-ish weeks. And I think too that I think being an artist is hard. Not just from the mothering standpoint, but I thought it was hard pre-kid too. I think it's hard to make work, to put it out in the world, to be confident about it all the time. I think it's hard. And I think that I used to think I had to have my brain on in a certain way all the time. Like, I'm in the studio, this is hard, so I need to be focused, I need to be making decisions, I need to be experimenting and practicing and thinking about everything conceptual about this. How does this tie in with my research? How does this tie in with my experience? Like, I wanted everything to kind of be perfect, and I think because I'm a mother and I'm busy, I make a lot more decision points early. Like, now I know what my paper quilts are going to look like kind of when they're done. And so I need to make 50 decisions because I need to have those decisions mentally already locked in so that when I have that 5 minutes, when one kid's going to the bathroom and the other kid is looking for something that I know where it is, but I'm not telling them because I want that 5 minutes, then I'm going to die the next 300 things because I know that when we get back from the basketball game, they'll be ready for me to lay out. And then when I have 2 hours of childcare the next day, I can start taping them down. So there's a little bit of like, I don't know where that is at play. And then there's a little bit of sort of a mental shift of like, I just need to have a list of 15 things I know I need to do next instead of think about it at every single stage. Because I know I will have blocks of time, and those quiet hours are the decision times. And then all those little fractured moments are the moments where it's like, okay, 300 are getting dyed blue, 200 are getting stitched. I'm testing out these techniques for this. And so it just, I don't know that I necessarily changed the actual product of my work. Like, I'm still making paper quilts, but I changed how I think about it and when I think about it.
Yeah, and like you mentioned, Laura, I didn't have an art practice before becoming a mother. I became a mother first. So I think for me, it's become more of like a collaborative type of relationship with my daughter when it comes to art. Oftentimes, I look to my family for feedback on art, specifically because they are creatives as well. So my daughter being interested in art as well, and now studying film. She's been making movies ever since the iPad came around. As soon as the iPad was a thing, she was recording everything and just, making these little sets with her dolls and recording her own movies. And now whenever I'm doing a project, I actually hire her to do the work for me. And of course, I give her credit and I pay her as well. But I feel like with my art practice, she's definitely a huge particle of it, whether that's just in providing feedback, being around and supporting me by bringing me something to drink, something to eat while I'm busy and I can't, tend to myself. She comes and she shows me these ways of love, right? And also just her connection to other relationships now. It's we talk about it often now when we go out together. We meet people that we're both friends with, which she's like, that's kind of weird, Mom. Like, because I'm older or they're younger or whatever it is. There really isn't an age gap, right? It's like multiple ages, multiple generations fit into art. And I think having those types of friendships are also something that's greatly important for any individual. So I see her more as a collaborator now and a confidant when it comes to me being within vulnerable spaces with my art. Like I said, I'm all of my art is informed by my experience as an undocumented person and now as a documented person. And just having such a politicized life where there's a lot of insecurity and uncertainty, I think art definitely becomes that tool for us to be able to have these discussions together and be vulnerable with one another. And it greatly helps me to be able to then talk in a broader context about them.
Thank you. Those were wonderful answers. I like what you said, Gloria, about one thing that I definitely find among artists is there's not really, it never feels like an age gap. Whether it's like an emerging artist that you're like, how have I not seen your work before? And they're like, oh, it's because you're 21 or something. And then I remember one time I took my mom to an art opening with me, and I was talking about my friend by her first name the whole time, and then she was there, and I introduced her. And afterwards, my mom was like, she's older than me. It was like, it's funny. I didn't even think about that, but there's something that happens with the kind of with art community that does feel that way. Like it's, I don't know. I feel like we all relate to each other in that way, even if you have more of like maybe a mentor or kind of relationship. But in that secondary part, is like the timeline of being an artist, a lifelong timeline. It's not something you retire from. That's something I still carry with me a lot, and it came from, I don't even know what the quote was, but it was more like seeing a portrait of Alice Neal and when she was in her 80s or something like that, and a self-portrait. And I was a student at school and thought oh, that makes me kind of calm down. I'm a pretty go kind of person. And it makes you be able to take a breath and say, okay, well, however many hours of artwork I can fit in the rest of my lifetime is what it will be. But I have the rest of my lifetime to continue making that work. And, I only have this time with my kids at any age that they're at. So I'm going to make this my last question. Are we okay on time, Lauren? Yeah? Okay. I'll make this my last question because I know we were going to see if anyone in the audience had questions. But this kind of takes it back. It's a little bit of what we're talking about of there's so much to be gained by being a parent to a child and being an artist, but there's a lot that we knowingly miss out on. A lot of art events are not really made to bring your children to them, and a lot of art events happen at bedtime, and there's a lot of things that are just kind of systemic in the art world. But I wonder if everyone could maybe give an example of something that they're, or an example of the trade-off of something that you don't do because you're choosing to make your artwork instead, or you're choosing to be a good mom instead. And then, maybe something that's kind of an example of the reverse of that you wouldn't have had otherwise. If you weren't doing both.
I choose not to exercise. There's a couple things like that just, there's that's the bottom of the list. So I do my daily walk and then I don't exercise. No, but I think that one thing that's really beautiful about being an artist mother, and particularly with my space right now, is that my studio is really open. The kids are welcome. Even though it's my space and my paper quilts are all over on the wall and it's my stuff, there's always a space for them. They have their own drawer. They have their own supplies. When I'm up early, I lay stuff out for my kids when they get up on school days to come in and do what they want to. And that cycles. We're in a cycle right now where my kids are no, thank you. I would rather lie on your floor and talk to you while you're trying to read something. But there are months where they'll just be super into lino cuts and then they won't be. And then they'll be super into watercolors and then they won't be. And so that's something that is just beautiful. I love getting little notes on my studio table. I love when my son was 2 and 3, I cut a lot of circles. And so I would get these really wonky, ugly, glorious circles. And it'd be this square circle. I'm well, I didn't do that. So it's it was a little gift from my little kid, And so that's something beautiful that inspires me every single day. Your example about the art openings, I think I've been to one since I've been here for 3 years. And that, you're right, it's the bedtime thing. That's the one thing that I do give up. And I do think that's a way to build community. And so that's something that I've really missed. I haven't solved that dilemma yet, because your other point about, this is their time, I just really want to take in every single stage. It goes so fast. And 10 years from now, they'll be in college, and I don't want to look back and think, oh, gee, I finished that paper quilt, but then I missed these things with them. So I'm throwing down the kid time right now. And that means I choose my paper quilts more selectively for right now.
I want to piggyback off of that because that's something that I'm still working through, is the ability to surrender that artist time. I was having a nice visit maybe a month ago with Forrest Solis, who's the artist mother, one of my role models. And I hadn't seen her for a long time. And she was how are you? And then I just word vomited her about all these things that I was dealing with. And she just sat back. And then after a minute, she was it sounds like you're asking if you ever get your identity back. And she said to me, she was you will. And then she said, your life is actually really long. And so when I had my child, I was just like, this is my job now. Like, and thinking about, between her comment and then my other friend's comment, thank you, about about her being like, something that I've made. I like thinking about her, like, and mothering as like a work in progress has really shifted that mentally, you're talking about those different sort of like divisions, and that sort of like psychological space has really shifted, even just recently for me. Where I'm still going to be able to find these moments to make work, and it's just like I'm always going to be making something because that's just part of like who I am and what fuels me. But yeah, like someone said, you only have like 18 summers with your kids, like when they're little, and like just breaking it down like that, I was like, yeah, I need to be here in this space right now, and that feels really important to me. Missing out on art openings, yes. A friend of mine just recently was like, I got Sylvan Esso concert tickets. I got one for you. And I was like, yeah, I can't go to that. It's like, I can't even imagine what it'd be like to be out of my house like after 7 p.m. Like, what is that about? I don't know anymore. So yeah, I think those kind of things, you just sacrifice. And it's a season, right?
So for me, again, coming into it a little bit backwards, it's kind of nice looking back now and seeing how some things worked out themselves. I was doing a lot of table vending back in the day, so I feel like those kinds of spaces are definitely very family-friendly spaces. So at the time, I was making jewelry, which I could make at home and then go and vend it. So then my daughter, being 6, 7, 8 years old, I would tell her, if you help me sell, I'll give you a cut. So it gave her these great skills on being able to talk to people, doing math, packaging stuff up. So I can even see it now, right? Being that age and taking her to an exhibition, there's definitely, that's not a kid-friendly space. But I also feel like that's what's great about art, that there are so many paths within it. So there's choices that we can make. One personal one that I cannot partake in at this point in time is traveling. So traveling outside of the state for residencies would just be something that I just can't do at this point in time. Financially, it's not something that I could sustain within my practice. Traveling out nationally is out of the picture because of my DACA status. So I feel like, again, that's the beauty of art, is that there are those different choices, and it was actually one of the reasons why, instead of me choosing to go back into a healthcare field, I chose to go into a creative field, because it is, the degree itself doesn't really get you a whole lot, let's be honest, right? But I think it's the creative aspect of it and those skills that we learn within it that really allow us to think outside of the box and to look for different solutions. It's very challenging, but at the same time, there's options that I feel that in other systemic careers, it just doesn't exist. So I'm grateful for that.
That's a good point too. And there's such there's a pretty good history there of women and different groups of artists creating new space. When there's, when you're talking about, there's so many different pathways there. So sometimes what we know can be very sort of excluding is a very narrow view of like what the like kind of supposed art world is, which is slowly shifting as well, but is like rooted so deeply in a lot of things that are probably not going to see radical change, in real ways in the next decade or so, but hopefully. And I think it's more about just, writing what your own space is and deciding what you're good with missing out on, because there's a lot of that kind of FOMO, I would say sometimes, when it's like, I know I've said that on an exit hundreds of times, like to a group of people that maybe look at me like, what? I'm like, it's like 7, so I gotta it's bedtime, or like I gotta get back, and they're like, well, we're gonna go get cocktails after this. Like that sounds incredible. I just want to say thank you to everybody, because I know there's a lot of personal things to share in the topics that we're talking about. There's a lot of, vulnerability and emotions that we share. So I really appreciate everybody today talking about your experiences.